Jesus said, "Man cannot live on bread alone, but from every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." You're listening to Daily Truth.
You know, it's funny. You could say, in a sense, that evangelicals, and I don't have time to define all these words. You can Google them on your way out the door. But as evangelicals really began to embrace dispensational premillennialism, in a nutshell, what is that? The Left Behind series nails it. That's dispensational premillennialism. The idea that the world is destined to get worse and worse, and that Jesus will return, that nothing can get better, not really, until Christ returns, and that Christ's return will be relatively soon, probably in our lifetime. All right, did you know historically throughout church history, for 2,000 years, every generation of Christians thought that Jesus was going to return in their lifetime? Every single generation thought that. He might. Probably not. But as evangelicals embrace this dispensational premillennialism, the world is going to get worse. Jesus is the only hope, which is true. But Jesus, through the church, is going to be overall unsuccessful. It is only when Jesus himself physically returns to establish his millennial rule for a literal 1,000 years, seated on the literal earthly throne of David, meaning Israel has been reestablished as a nation state. The temple has to be rebuilt. David's throne has to be placed back. Jesus will physically return, which he will, but he's going to rule then for a literal 1,000 years from Jerusalem. And until Jesus' return, things will only get worse and worse. So there's really not a whole lot of benefit to, reordering the deck on the Titanic, right? Or polishing brass on a sinking ship. You've perhaps heard these phrases. And Jesus, he's coming back any minute. If I was John Hagee, I would say probably before I finish this sermon. Any minute. Well, that was the mentality of evangelicals. Not all of them, but many of them. This dispensational premillennialism. So the thought was, Jesus is coming back anytime. And so what we need to do, and there was some good in this, it's not all bad, but what we need to do is this: we don't really need long-term projects. We probably shouldn't focus quite as much on starting classical Christian schools, for instance. Right? We can just send our kids to public school, and yeah, it's a bummer that they took prayer out of the schools. But, the schools they're not bad. They're not good, but they're also not bad. They're just neutral. Public education is just neutral, and we'll combat that neutral education that they're getting in the public school with our 7 minutes of family worship that we do once a month. And then what we can do as we neglect our children, that'll free up so much time and energy and resources to what we can do is, because Jesus is the only hope, his literal return, his physical literal return is the only way things get better. What we need to do is focus on, is there any way we can speed that up? Oh, well, the Bible talks about one of the conditions that needs to be met is that every tribe, tongue, and nation has to hear. So what will we do as evangelicals? We'll neglect our children, and we'll pour ourselves into global missions. Right? So instead of leaving a literal financial inheritance to our children, we'll give to international mission boards. The boomer generation is the only generation so far in American history with such a lack of shame that they would actually drive around with bumper stickers that say, "I'm spending my kids' inheritance," and laugh about it. That level of wickedness is incredible. Prior generations would have slapped them in the face. How dare you treat my grandchildren like that, you ungrateful piece of garbage? What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you? Oh, well, we're giving it to global missions. We're giving it to the church. Didn't Jesus have something to say about that? I mean, think about this. There's a lot of principles in Scripture that we can apply here and apply. Jesus explicitly addressed this one. Jesus said that the Pharisees were perverting the law when they tried to get people in Israel to give their money to the church rather than using that money to help their family. He said, no, it belongs to the family. You take care of your family first, and then you can be generous to the church. But again, the Pharisees, they were getting them to basically their dowry. It's like a trust. So that when they died, all of their possessions would go to the synagogue, to the temple, and to the Levitical order, rather than going to their family as an inheritance. And Jesus says, that's not generosity, that's stealing. That's theft. Yeah, but what about the prodigal son? What if my kids, they don't use it? That's on them. Your job is to obey God. So train up your children the way they should go and trust that the promises of God will not fail. When they're old, they will not depart from it. And even if they do depart from it, you can stand before God and say, I did my job. I raised my kids, I taught them the truth, and I left them an inheritance that they might use it in practical ways in the world that furthers your kingdom and that brings you glory. And if they don't, then it's on them. But instead, what evangelicals did with this mindset, Jesus is coming back tomorrow, and until he does, the world can only get worse. And if we try to improve the world, in many ways, we're actually going against Christ. This is what he wants. This is what he said. And so what we'll do, the only thing we can do is try to speed up his return, which means global missions with all of our resources, with all of our time, all of our focus, which means what we can't do, what we don't have the bandwidth left over to do, is starting schools, spending lots of time with our children. The children are really a distraction from our ministry. So we'll put them in childcare. We'll give them to the state. I mean, think about that. Has there ever been, in global history, has there ever been, to the degree that it is in America right now, such a handing off of our own children? Right? You send them to school, and now what are we trying to do? Even in policy, we're trying to get state-funded childcare because like 13 years from kindergarten through 12th grade, that's just not enough. Right? 13 years away from mom and dad is not enough. Let's extend it to what? Like 16 years? 17 years? Right? So now, like when they're 2 or 3, we need to get state-funded childcare because getting parents, Christian parents, children away from them at the age of 5 might be too late. Let's see if we can get them at 3. Let's see if we can get them at 2. Right? And so what do? You hand your kids off to school. You hand them off to daycare. You hand them off to the nanny. When you come to church, you hand them off to Christian childcare. I won't call it Christian church because church is where the word is preached and the supper is rightly administered. It's not church. Right? Parents, Christian, and I'm talking about Christian parents that in many ways are good parents. They don't even bring their kids to church. If a parent won't even bring their kid to church, then of course they're not going to bring them to Christian education in school. So we just get rid of the kids every moment of every day. On the Lord's Day, kids over in another room. Martin Luther King, he once said that Sunday morning is the most divided hour in our nation. Now, he was talking about ethnicity. Black churches, white churches, brown churches. I would argue it's still the most divided hour in our nations, in our whole week as a nation. But not by ethnicity, but by age. Children over here, mom and dad over here. Let's worship Jesus, and we can't be distracted. Right? And if we're talking about distraction, I understand that it's hard for parents in the room with little kids. I understand. Not to beat my own chest, but for a moment, you don't have to preach through it. Right? You think I'm not aware as I'm preaching? You think I haven't heard my daughter over there in the corner screaming the entire time? I'm aware. This isn't the fruit of being oblivious. This is the fruit of honed, practiced skill to ignore that. And I'm not going to ignore it indefinitely, because when church is over, I'm going to go and be a father to her and deal with that. It's hard, but it's worth it. It's worth it. I remember someone of some significance saying, "Let the little children come to me." Certainly they should be able to come to Christ as he's preached in the Word. Come to Christ as he's seen in the supper. Come to Christ as we sing and address one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs. Come to Christ as he is prayed by the church. And if that means that moms and dads, and let's be honest, more so moms, are distracted from the Word as it's preached, well, let's trust that whatever you glean on the Lord's day, as you're doing your best to manage these little souls, that it is better for you to glean 60, 50, 30% of that sermon, but for your children to sit under the preached word with you, to worship with it. Well, they don't understand, Joel. You use big theological words. Well, yeah, you adults, you don't understand some of the words I use either. But I'm glad you're here. And there are things that they do understand. There's so much that our children comprehend. I mean, I think I told you this already, but it was about 6 months ago. We were doing family worship at the breakfast table. We do this every day. It takes us about half an hour. And I remember asking one of our catechism questions to Olive, and she just kept going. It was a simple answer, but she just kept going. And I was like, where are you getting this information? And then I realized she's quoting the Apostles' Creed. Where did she learn that? Because it's not a part of our family worship. Oh, she learned it because she sits in church each Lord's Day. And we say the Apostles' Creed. And she's learned the 10 Commandments. And she's learned about forgiveness of sin. And she's learned 1 John 1:9. Not just her, Ruth, 2 years old. And we think, well, our children can't comprehend. They can't correlate this with that. They can. My wife and I were talking about this on our way to church today. My wife was feeling a little bit discouraged with one of our children. And I was trying to encourage her from the Word of God. Do not grow weary in doing good. In the proper time, it will reap a harvest. And we were talking about children correlating. It's like, well, do they get it? Because sometimes I don't know if they get it yet. Okay, well, in terms of correlation, the principle of correlation, is your child old enough to throw a fit and correlate throwing the fit with getting what they want? Can they correlate with what they want? If they can correlate that, you know what else they can correlate? Discipline. Right? What we're doing is from a very young age, we're reinforcing, in our moments where we fail, we are reinforcing sin with reward, bad behavior with a good result. You throw a fit, you get this. Why are they throwing the fit? Right? If there's no correlation, no comprehension, nothing going on in that little head of theirs whatsoever, then why do they throw a fit every time they're upset? They're doing it to produce a certain result. They think that blank equals blank, which proves that at that stage, they're old enough to learn the opposite. That this does not produce that, but actually this produces something else. That disobedience produces discipline, and obedience produces blessing. And you start shaping. And I'm talking about 1-year-olds right now. Once they're 2, 3 years old, I mean, all they might hear in today's sermon is ministry, because I'm going to say it again and again and again. Ministry, ministry. And so on the way home, you, with your children, you say, hey, Pastor Joel said the word ministry a lot. Did you hear that? Yes or no? What is ministry? What is faithful ministry? Is faithful ministry easy or is it hard? What do we do in ministry? What are some of the challenges of ministry? Are you called to ministry? And you just start talking about that. We've had several conversations where the only word that our child gleaned that day was gospel. Gospel is a pretty good word. There's a lot to talk about with that one word, gospel. I've kind of banked my whole career on there being a lot to talk about with that one word, gospel. I'm hoping to get 50 years out of it. So certainly we can have a conversation or two with our children about it. But Christians, in large part, abandoned that work. And I really think that one of the primary reasons for abandoning that work with our children is because it's slow. And for those who say, well, you know, eschatology, I'm a pan-millennial, right? It'll all pan out in the end. That's my eschatology. Well, that's true. It will all pan out in the end. But do not deceive yourselves. Eschatology, your belief of the end times, what the Bible teaches about the end times, it will dictate how you live. It will. And how do I know that? Because it did very much dictate how Christians in our nation lived over the past 40 years. And I believe in large part that's why we're here today. They thought the whole world was going to end very soon, and they lived like it. And so what do we have? Global missions and apostate children.
Wait. Real quick, before you go, do me a favor. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell so you'll be notified with all our new content as it comes out on a daily basis. And if you're willing to support this ministry, you can do so by going to rightresponseministries.com/donate. Thanks so much. God bless.